Hi everyone, Janie here. Welcome back to my garden. We are coming to the end of our gardening season. It's a late October right now. Everything's kind of starting to calm down and go to sleep, and it's a great time of year to look back on your season and take note of what were really great performers in your garden this past year. Now, I have decided to pick out 10 plants that I thought were really rock stars in my garden this season. And some of them you all have heard me talk about for years and years and years, and they were not a surprise. But other ones were a surprise to me. It's so funny to me how plants' performances can change from year to year. You can have a really great year of, say, dahlias, and then a really horrible year of dahlias, and you kind of just got to go with it. So some of these were surprises to me. Some of these were brand new plants to me, and some of them were well-known and loved plants that I just have to give another shout out. So let's get into my top 10 performers this season. So these plants are in no particular order. The first one I want to talk about is a plant that I have loved for a long time, but this is actually a different version, a different color, and that is Surefire White Begonia. Now, I have grown Surefire Rose for a couple years now, and I absolutely love it. It is such a rock star of a plant, but I had never grown Surefire White before. And I saw Surefire White Begonia actually at the 4-Star Display Gardens in Michigan, and they were pretty there, right? They were really pretty. They weren't that tall. They were only about this tall when I saw them there. And I was impressed, but I just kind of had a feeling that they would perform better in my California garden. And they did. So I planted Surefire White Begonia in my secret shade garden, what I was calling my secret shade garden, but it turned out to be not a shade garden at all. Well, I should say one side of it did turn out to be a shade garden. The other side of it turned out to be almost a full sun garden. But that is the amazing thing about the Surefire begonias. They can handle full shade and they can handle full sun. They can handle whatever. They might grow a little bit differently. For instance, if you're in full shade, they might be a little leggier and be a little taller because they're reaching for the sun, but they're still going to bloom and they're still going to be beautiful. And then if you put them in full sun, they're going to be a little shorter and compact because they don't have to reach for the sun as much. So that's what happened in my secret shade garden is I planted all these plants that I thought would do beautifully in the shade, but once the sun got high enough in the sky, I realized it was a secret sun garden and everything else fried except for the Surefire White. And they ended up being absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. They're still blooming their heads off today, the end of October, and they're just one of my favorite plants. So I definitely wanted to add this one to my list. I had a feeling it would do well because the Surefire Rose did so well, but you never know when it comes, color to color. They could perform a little bit differently, kind of like Supertunia, different colors perform a little bit differently, but the Surefire White, oh, it is definitely a winner, and I am loving it and will definitely be repeating it. The next plant on my list of top performers for this year it was a surprise for me. It was a surprise because this plant was rated only up to zone 8, and I live in zone 9B. So I wasn't sure if this plant was going to perform well for me, and you all probably heard me talk about this a million times, and that is pink profusion salvia. Holy cow, this is an amazing plant, and I really hope Proven Winners changes the zone rating. I know that they probably won't because it probably doesn't perform as well in humidity, but for our climate on the West Coast, hot and dry, oh my gosh, it did so well. First of all, I planted this plant in the fall, last fall. So it had all winter long to settle in and to root in. And by early spring, my pink profusion salvia was blooming beautifully. I mean, I remember I didn't even have any annuals in the ground yet, and it was already showing really, really gorgeous color. And all year I had expected this plant to kind of have an early show and then peter out for the rest of the season. And so I kept waiting for it to kind of fade out, and it just didn't fade. It just didn't fade. And I have to say, I kind of tortured this plant because what you need to do is you need to prune it back halfway through the season. And I just didn't because I just kept expecting it to fade out. And I thought, oh, well, I'll cut it back once it completely fades out. And it just never did. It just kept blooming. So I'm sure had I cut it back halfway through the season, I would have had an even better show this year. So I'm really excited about next year because it performed so well that I'm planning on adding even more of the pink profusion salvia in. This is called a Salvia nemorosa, which actually does really well for us here in California. So I can't say I'm completely surprised that it performed so well. I'm just so happy that it did. So this plant was the first plant to start blooming early in the season, and then it bloomed all season long. And right now in late October, it is still blooming. It is still looking beautiful. And it's one of those really bright saturated colors that you can see all the way across the yard. So this plant was a surprise for me, but it was definitely one of my top performers for this year. So the next plant I have on my best performers list is different than the pink profusion salvia, because the pink profusion salvia was one of the first to bloom. This plant, it took a while. It took a while to come to the party. So I had planted this plant in the fall at the exact same time as my pink profusion salvia. And it took a couple of months. In the very beginning of the season, spring, even early summer, I was kind of looking at this plant like, I think it's a dud. I don't think it's going to perform very well for me. Then all of a sudden, summer hit, midsummer hit. We've got our triple digit temperatures up to 110 degrees, 115 degrees. And my chiclet orange Tacoma just came into its own. It started blooming these beautiful orange tubular flowers that the hummingbirds have been all over all season long, and it has not stopped blooming. And it's been such a beautiful bloom. It's another one of those blooms that I can see across the way, which you guys know, I love that if I can see a bloom color across the way, and it's just so beautiful. And it has been such a rock star since it started blooming. So I just have to say, for the chiclet orange Tacoma, it likes the heat. It needs to get warm, kind of like a gomphrena. But once it does, just like a gomphrena, it is just such a rock star. When everything else is kind of struggling in the heat, this plant has just been such a fabulous performer. And I've heard from Spring Meadow that there's a new color coming out, which I'm really excited about. I don't know if I can say it yet, but it's yellow and I'm really excited. And so it's just a fabulous, fabulous plant. It gets about 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. And one of the best things about this plant is it mimics a trumpet vine, an orange trumpet vine, which everybody loves, but they get out of control very, very quickly. So it's the same kind of flowers, the same kind of bloom, just in a much more controlled shrub. So it is definitely a winner, but give this one a little bit time to get established. And once summer hits, you're going to be so happy. So speaking of shrubs, the next plant on my top performers list is another new to me shrub that I kind of had a feeling it was going to perform well because it is a cross between a catalpa and a desert willow. And we have a lot of desert willows around here in my dry, hot environment, and they perform really well. So I kind of knew the El Nino catalpa was going to perform really well for me and my heat. What I didn't know though was how much I was going to enjoy the blooms on this plant. It is called a desert orchid, and I think that that is the perfect name for it because the flowers really do look like orchids, or maybe even like big sized snapdragons that are just so beautiful. I love this color pink. It is just such a beautiful addition to the garden. One of the things I love the most about this plant is what a fast grower it is. I mean, it grew probably like 3 feet from when I planted it just this season, and I planted it part way through the season. So I'm really optimistic about this plant and how well it's going to grow in our environment. It started blooming right away. I actually had blooms on it when I planted it, and it kept blooming all season long. Now, I ended up pruning mine because I'm trying to train it into a small tree, about a 10-foot tree, and it takes really well to pruning. But I think had I not pruned all the blooms off, it would still be blooming to right now. So it is just a fabulous, fabulous new addition to my garden. I'm really excited about it, and I think it is a plant that not a lot of people know about, but it is just, I really think it's going to be such a fabulous plant to have in your garden. So the next plant that I have on my top performers list is a plant that is very popular around here. It's very common, but I just got to give credit where credit is due because this plant brought so much joy to my garden and to my life this season, and in particular, my zigzag planter, and that was my purple fountain grass. I planted purple fountain grass for fall interest last year in my zigzag planter, and then I left it up all winter long. I enjoyed it so much, and it broke my heart to cut it back in late winter, early spring, but I'm so glad I did because all the new growth came, and then all season long, I had this beautiful, beautiful grass that gave me so much movement, and it was so playful and so whimsical, and it was just the background of so many of my videos. Anytime that I wanted to take a picture, I always ended up wanting to take it right in front of the purple fountain grass because it was so beautiful. It's such a gorgeous, gorgeous plant, and it is such a good bang for your buck plant because it grows really fast, it gets really big. At the end of the season, you can divide it as many times as you need to, and you can transplant it. It is just one of those workhorses that you have in your garden, and I am so happy that I chose to put that in my zigzag planter because it allowed me to realize how much I needed height and movement in that zigzag planter. And so I'm planting another grass, totem pole panicum, in there this upcoming season to see how it does. So purple fountain grass is just one of my favorite plants. And even if it's not a perennial for you, even if it doesn't overwinter for you, absolutely use it as an annual and plant it early on in the season because come summer, once you get that movement and once you get those seed heads, it's just so beautiful. I love this plant and it will always be a top performer in my garden. Now let's go back to an annual that did really well for me this year, and it actually did really well for me last year as well. And last year was the first year that I had tried this plant, and that was Whirlwind Blue Scola. And once I started planting Scola, I cannot imagine not planting Scola because it is one of those plants that the more heat it has, the better that it does. I've told you all this a couple times. My mom lives on the top of a hill or top of a mountain, and she has some really hot wind that comes up and blasts her patio area where her pool is. And she has to be really careful for what she plants in the pots around those, like right on that side of the hill. And what she plants in her pots every year is Scola, because Scola can handle that hot, dry wind that will completely demolish anything else. But Scola says, thank you, may I have more? And it's just a fabulous, fabulous plant. So I planted this in my orchard garden this year, and I planted a mass of them, and it has just been blooming its head off absolutely nonstop. And Monty here, that's laying behind me, he has been using this bed of Scola as a dog bed all season long. I find him there sleeping in the bed of Scola all the time, and the Scola still looks so beautiful. So that's something to say, because I have other plants that I planted in my garden that Monty just demolished like that. And so this plant, this annual, is able to withstand the heat and dog pressure. All right, next we have another annual on my top performers list, and I am so excited about this plant. I'm so excited for how well it performed in my garden. I was optimistic about it, but you know, you never really know. But it just blew my mind. It was so wonderful, and I'm so excited that now we have another option of a really, really beautiful pink Supertunia. So Proven Winners came out with a new variety. Actually, they're coming out with it next year, so you should be able to get your hands on it next year. It's called the Tiara series, and the reason why it's called the Tiara series is it looks like these flowers have tiaras on them because they start out, the center of their throats are white, and then they fade out to the color, or I should say the color fades into the throat. It's really beautiful, and they almost look like they're glowing. I mean, seriously, they look like they're glowing. And there's Tiara Blue, and then there's Tiara Pink. And the Tiara Blue is very beautiful. It's a very beautiful plant. It's nothing compared to the Tiara Pink. It is nothing compared to the Tiara Pink. So the Tiara Blue is much more compact, and it stays small, and it has a beautiful color to it, right? I don't want to dig on Tiara Blue at all. It's a gorgeous plant, But the Tiara Pink, it's not as vigorous as a Supertunia bubblegum. So don't think of it as a Supertunia Vista bubblegum. It's not even technically a Vista, because to be a Supertunia Vista for proven winners, you have to have, what do they call it? Latticing. Basically, the stems have to be able to like grow into each other and it will pile it on top of each other. And Supertunia Tiara Pink doesn't do that. But what it does do is it grows really big out, and it will climb on things. So I actually have it right in front of my office right here, and I have a spiral juniper plant, and I have the Tiara Pink growing up the juniper spiral, and it is just so beautiful. So it is such a winner. It is such a fabulous new introduction as an annual, and I'm really excited to plant it more in my garden because this is my color pink for sure. Okay, so I know I talk a lot about ornamentals on this channel. I talk a ton about annuals, a ton about perennials, and a ton about shrubs. Those are my favorites. They're my bread and butter. They're the ones that I always want to talk about and think about. But there is one veggie plant that I just had to add into this list because it was such a top performer. I can't imagine ever not planting this plant from now on. And I just have to share the word because it is, I mean, as a gardener who's not the best at veggie gardening, it's so nice to have a success in the veggie garden. And Sungold Tomatoes give me that success. So Sungold is a variety of cherry tomatoes. It's kind of got this orangey color, and it has the sweetest fruit. The amazing thing about this plant, it's so prolific. I can't even get over how prolific it is. It will start producing and then it will not stop producing. It's absolutely incredible. And I planted it right next to another cherry tomato plant, same conditions, everything. And that tomato, I barely got a bowl full. And this one, it was like, I could not eat enough. We were eating so many of these Sungold tomato plants. Now, I know each variety of tomatoes is specific to each region. And if you don't live in a similar region like I do, you have to find which tomato plant works really well for you. But just try the Sungold cherry tomatoes because they're so wonderful. They're so delicious and they're so easy to grow. It is definitely a top performer in my garden. Okay, so we've got 2 more plants on my top performers list for this year. And I do want to point out that this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a list of plants that kind of surprised me or ones that I do want to talk about. I have another list called my Best for the West list. You can go on the Proven Winners website to the Best for the West idea boards. I'll put a link in the description down below. And those are all plants that are just fabulous for my climate. If you live in a hot, dry area, that's my climate. And all of those plants were fabulous. And so some of these plants are on that list, some are not on that list, but I didn't want this to be a Best for the West video. I just wanted it to be a top performers video. And again, some that I was really, really surprised by. So the next 2, I'm not really surprised by them. I knew they would be fabulous performers. The first one is a Miss Molly Budia or butterfly bush. This shrub is just one of the best butterfly bushes you can get. It is so beautiful. It has this magenta red color to it. I don't even think it's a red color. I think they describe it as red. It's not. It's like this deep magenta color, and it grows so well and it blooms so beautifully. And I've seen monarchs on it all year. Like, it's just been so gorgeous and so prolific. And it's just one of those classic Budlias that you have to have it in your garden. There's just no way that you can't have it in your garden. Michael Glassman, the landscape designer who I work with, who's a friend of mine, he loves this plant too. It's just one of those shrubs that is going to perform beautifully and you don't even have to worry about it at all. So I have quite a few Miss Mollies in my garden, and I know I'm going to add some more because it's just one of those shrubs that I know is just going to be beautiful in the garden all season long. So Miss Molly Budia, it gets about 4 to 5 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet wide. Hands down recommend it. Okay, I think I saved my favorite for the last. I love all of these plants that I talked about, but I love this last plant the most, absolutely the most, and I'm sure you're all sick of me talking about it. This one actually is on my Best for the West list, and that is Plain the Blues Salvia. This plant, This is just, if you're a beginner gardener, if you're an advanced gardener, if you're a lazy gardener like I am, this is such a good plant for you because it's so easy to care for. It starts blooming and it just does not stop blooming. It's so beautiful. So the purple bloom spikes, they come out early on in the season, and the bumblebees and the carpenter bees and the butterflies are all over this plant. It's absolutely beautiful. It does look a little bit better if you do cut it back, cut off the spent blooms. But if you can't be bothered, right? If you get too lazy or too distracted, it's okay. It's still going to look beautiful, even if you don't deadhead it, which is something that I absolutely love. I think that is a quality about plants that I just think is amazing. So this plant actually is a temperennial for me in my zone. It will actually overwinter, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So what I do at the end of this season, once I get my first frost, I cut back all the bloom spikes just to where the foliage is. So I basically leave the foliage all winter long to kind of protect the roots and protect the stems. And then in the spring, I will cut it, to about 2 or 3 inches above the ground so that you can have big, beautiful new growth next season. It is just such a beautiful performer. It adds so much life to your garden because it brings in those pollinators, and the spikiness of these blooms is just such a wonderful, wonderful addition. The other thing I love about Plain the Blue Salvia is it's kind of very similar to the Surefire begonias in that you can put it in shade. You can put it in part shade. I wouldn't put it in full shade. Put it in part shade, or you can put it in full sun and it'll be totally happy. And a common question that I get from people is, what plant can I plant in a west-facing garden where it has shade most of the day and then it gets hot, late afternoon sun? What is a plant that can handle those harsh conditions? And Plain the Blue Salvia is hands down one of those plants that can handle those conditions. It can handle the lack of sunlight for most of the day, and then it can handle that glaring, beating down sun in the late afternoon. It is such a fabulous plant. It is such a good performer, and basically every year I've had a good year with Plain the Blue Salvia. All right, so that is it for my top 10 performers of 2024. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are 10 plants that I had to give shout outs because they've just done so well in my garden. So I want to know in the comment section below, what were your top performers and what zone or area do you live in? Just so that we all can get ideas to kind of add more easy plants or top performer plants to our own gardens. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a chance to get in your garden today.